First up then, this from Joe on Blue Sky, with Mo Salah possibly set to leave at the end of the season, and we stress possibly. Who do you think should replace him? It's a good question, Joe. Obviously, we're not. The media's not quite there yet because he may well stay. But at some point in the fairly near future, Mo Salah will part ways with Liverpool, whether it's at the end of this season or in a couple of seasons' time. He will leave enormous scoring boots to fill, of course. One of the greatest players in the club's history, an absolute ledge, and one of the best players we've seen in the English top flight. It's not a ridiculous thing to say. So, massive shoes to fill, Jim.
Yeah.
Who do you think could replace him?
So I think you're right to point out sort of what a brilliant player he's been for Liverpool and for the league in general, because we should caveat it by saying it's very, very unlikely that someone's going to come in straight away and hit the sort of numbers that Salah has hit, because funnily enough, Salah himself only really became truly, truly prolific to the level that we know him at now in his first season at Liverpool. He'd started to, score good number of goals in Italy, but when he got to Liverpool, that was when it really, really exploded. So I think when you're trying to identify someone like this, you're not looking at someone who's banging in 40 a season now, aren't they? Because there's barely anyone out there that is doing that. So
no, I understand that. Yeah, Liverpool will struggle to replace him more than say Chelsea did.
Indeed, yes. So I think,
come on, give us a name. Give us a couple of names.
In terms of big names, Rodrigo has already been linked. Of Real Madrid. Now, he's not left-footed, but he does play on the right. He might be available, obviously, because, Madrid have a big turnaround of those players, and he does seem like a star player they might be willing to part with. And obviously, if he's right-footed, which he is, that would give them the option of him switching flanks, which might be desirable to them. So he's a good opportunity. He's only 23 years old. From within the Premier League, I wonder if they might look at Jared Bowen, also left-footed, scores regularly, got 20 last season. He's 27. He's got a contract until 2030, which might make it complicated because he won't come cheap.
I think it would be too much money. Jared Bowen was. I understand why he's been mentioned, but it wouldn't be the one that I would have gone for. I think Rodrigo is maybe a better shout. David, who are you going to suggest?
They've had interest in Bowen before, haven't they? And that would be kind of the avenue of like, we haven't really got time to develop somebody right now.
Yeah.
We'd like somebody instant impact.
And I think this is likely to be the case, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I always thought Karim Adeyemi, Borussia Dortmund, was the ideal one. He's perhaps not kicked on as much as people thought, so he's one name. Johan Bakayoko at PSV. He has been linked a lot. I think he nearly went to Brentford as well, but I think something fell through there.
I think that a type of player like that, I think, is maybe more likely.
Yeah. So I could see them going, between 21, 23, somebody we can develop, somebody who's shown potential, flashes, something we can work with.
And they know they can just get him. Let's be honest.
He's got 2.5 years on his contract. He's 21, so he would be maybe one that would need a little bit more development, but they could get him in a heartbeat, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Kvaratskhelia was linked. His type of player, I think, is a rather different player.
Plays on the left, though.
Plays on the left. I wouldn't see that necessarily. The two names that I actually thought of haven't been mentioned. Actually, I thought maybe might be tempted to bring Rafinha back to the Premier League.
Okay.
Although I think this chap is a better fit, Brian Mbeumo.
Oh,
of Brentford fame.
I thought you were going to go another way in the Premier League.
Well, go on.
I thought you were going to be really far and go...
Anthony Gordon. Who was linked, actually. But even though he prefers to be playing on the left.
Dibbling at Southampton.
Oh.
Yeah, I think Mbeumo, the way he plays, is the most obvious fit for Salah in that kind of way.
Okay. And I think both of those names, Rafinha and Mbeumo, are smart because both of them, obviously Rafinha's a bit older, but he's got 13 goals and 10 assists already this season. He's only bettered that goal tally once in an entire season, and that was when he was a youngster in Brazil. He's peaking now. Brian Mbeumo is clearly gone up a level. He's in a similar situation where he's one goal away from his best Premier League return already.
Yes.
And so those are both players where you think, they are about to go up a level and perhaps be able to sustain it. And that is what Salah did when he arrived at Liverpool, as we've established. And that is kind of, if they are going to look for a like-for-like replacement, what you need to be targeting. So both of those players would fit that bill. I think another interesting one, would be Edon Jagrova, the winger at Lille. He's another one who has stepped up with productivity and has become consistent with it. I think the one thing that might give them a bit of pause for thought is the step up from Ligue 1 to the Premier League kind of bigger than it's been in the past? It might be a little bit of a gamble on that front, but he's a really tidy, really exciting player.
I wonder if Liverpool would want to see him move to maybe a mid-table Premier League club to get it up close. Say he went to a Brighton or a Brentford or somewhere like that, and then they can get a close-up view of him. Yes.
Well, a fair few names for you there, Joe, to think about. But I mean, it'd be another one actually. I mean, Antoine Semenyo of Bournemouth. I thought,
great shout.
Although a bit more right-footed, although he seems to be pretty devastating with both. Anyway, we're at risk of just naming a lot of good wingers, but that is the name of the game if you're trying to replace Mo Salah, which in time they certainly will have to do.
Yes.
Jim, you've got the next question.
Gareth has been in touch on email, traditionalist. He says, you guys speak very glowingly about Steve Cooper, as do the Forest fans, but after the Forest sacking and the Leicester Christmas party, do you think that some fans overrate him? I like the subtle dig here. Do you think that actually you guys are full of shit? Is what Gareth is hinting at.
Well, and Forest fans as well. I mean, I think there's a lot of love for Cooper. I suspect, certainly from my point of view, that this goes back to him winning the Under-17s World Cup and just seeing an England side winning a World Cup. It was kind of like, it's been a while. Of course, they did. I think they won the Under-20s World Cup as well, but that wasn't under Cooper. So yes, Cooper is still a young manager. I think one can forget that because he looks a little bit older, but he's only 44, Steve Cooper. And if you look at the jobs he's had, he's managed England at age level, then he was at Swansea and then Forest and Leicester. And when we were talking about Frank Lampard yesterday, I was wondering, look at the jobs he's taken. We don't really know too much about Frank Lampard as a manager that much. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt here. I think you could maybe say that a little bit about Steve Cooper.
Yeah, when he's been in the Premier League, it's always been in difficult circumstances, hasn't it?
Yes, and at Forest, of course, there was all that business where they signed all those players
and actually,
whatnot.
For that reason, I think Nuno Espirito Santo's relative success since shouldn't reflect badly on Cooper because the circumstances were very different. And I think a lot of making that squad coherent came under Cooper as well.
Yeah.
But that said, I think we all thought when Cooper came up with Forest that his ceiling might be higher than like fighting to keep teams in the Premier League.
Yes.
And based on what has actually happened in reality, we've not seen that that's the case.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see him with a better squad, and I've seen a few people say this. He deserves a better squad, more skill set in terms of to work with. I might be really, really harsh here.
Go on.
I think his career might just amount to being a very, very, very good Championship manager who gets teams up.
Yeah. So that would be my kind of fear for Cooper. And there's a lot of British managers where the Championship is kind of the ceiling. He did pretty well at Swansea here and there, but didn't get them.
He did. He's had 3 successes and 1 failure. England success, Swansea success, Forest success. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you look at it like that, and I think that with a lot of the British managers, we often think, okay, give him a big job, see what happens. But those who have had either fairly big jobs or big jobs, like Lampard and Potter are the obvious ones at Chelsea. Obviously, Howe's at Newcastle at the moment, which is, I would say, a fairly big job considering when he took over and all that. Howe's made a bit of a fist of it, although we were talking recently that he'll be coming under pressure soon enough if he doesn't kick them on to challenging more obviously for Europa League and, dare I say, Champions League. But I think with Cooper, I fear that's the ceiling because when English managers or British managers, Cooper's obviously Welsh, have those chances, they tend not to kind of work out. And there's that, mid-table's probably the best, really.
Yeah.
Let's take another former Swansea manager, Gary Monk. You remember him?
Yeah.
There was real hope about Gary Monk. Oh, what can he do? Again, looked like quite a well-thought-out manager with a structure and ideas and so on, a bit like Cooper. But ultimately, it ends up, really is in the Championship, really, or certainly in the Football League. That's where a lot of those managers they end up, and that's where they go. And I fear for Cooper that he may be one of those. I hope not. I hope he does get another chance in the Premier League. but you don't get that many often. And then you're hoping for, right, I'll manage to get another side promoted, and then you could come into the same problems and blah, 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 blah.
And I think he might. I think Forest, and look, I'm never going to write off what a manager means to a certain group of fans, and obviously he got them promoted after 23 years, you know, and I've seen what he means to the city and how he connected with those supporters. Never going to write that off, absolutely not. But I saw Nottingham Forest vision when they said, we need to move on from him, go to Nuno and see that progression. We need to do that, because Bournemouth did the same when they moved on from Gary O'Neill and they went down to Onirola, and clubs just see that natural progression there. Thank you for your work. You haven't been a failure. In fact, you've been a success. You've done very well for us, but it's okay. We just want to move on and go in a different direction.
You can go back to Pochettino at Southampton when Nigel Adkins, it felt like he was really harshly sacked, but sometimes it actually does make sense and it is the right move.
And it tends to happen to the British managers. There's the odd exception here and there, but they really are quite rare. But yeah, time will tell. So ultimately, do some fans overrate him? You'd have to say perhaps on current showings, really. Yep. But let's hope that he proves all the doubters wrong, including Gareth. As well. All right, after this, we are going to follow up with some of your answers to questions from last week's mailbag. Yes, we had a big response to the question last week regarding people who support two clubs. Can you do it? Can you support two teams in football? So a lot of you got in touch. We did a call to arms. This was after Jake and Carlos asked about that. And have you got in touch? So this from Owen on email, who says, following on from your discussion regarding supporting two teams and split loyalties, I thought you would like to hear about the time I had the worst possible scenario of this happening. I'm a Southampton fan, born and bred. However, I have an affinity with Fulham, as I worked for the club while I studied at Kingston University. For the most part, I've enjoyed supporting both teams. It has allowed me to have a connection with the two places I have called home. However, a couple of seasons ago, Southampton's relegation was sealed by Fulham's 2-0 victory at St Mary's. Obviously, I was back in Saints with more on the line, but come the final whistle, I felt mixed emotions, partly because our slow, painful death was over, but also, as I'm a Fulham fan, to see them win and Mitrovic scoring on his return from a ban was satisfying. Conflicted emotions didn't make relegation easier, as I then felt guilty for seeking solace within Southampton's relegation. So while I want to see both clubs win and do believe it's unrealistic not to feel an emotional attachment to multiple clubs, I don't know if I can truly wholeheartedly fully support either now. How do you think this you would feel in this very specific circumstance, he asks? I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah,
because it's saying that I don't know if I can truly wholeheartedly fully support either now suggests that, he's only got capacity for a certain amount of emotions for each side.
This is the exact sort of state of emotional turmoil that I would expect supporting two clubs to be if they kind of came up against each other in a situation like this. It's interesting. I also think there's a really interesting line in this from Owen as well, where he says, I do believe it's unrealistic to not feel an emotional attachment to multiple clubs, which is surprising to me because the opposite seems true to me, as we've discussed already. But how would I deal with this? I don't know. And it sounds like Owen himself doesn't know how to deal with it, having been through it. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I find this fascinating because so many people like you, Jim, think, no, it's not possible to support more than one side. And we did sort of...
I would caveat that by saying it's not possible for me personally. I do acknowledge that some people clearly can do it.
Yeah, but a lot of people would be in your camp and find it absolutely baffling. We also spoke about how, it's easier to support a side who are, say, non-league and a Premier League side because the chances of them meeting are incredibly unlikely. And if it was, it would be in the third round of the FA Cup and there's not a huge amount at stake. Yeah. And the lower side would just be loving getting into that round and getting to play one of the big boys. This, as he said, Southampton and Fulham, they never really were doing anything and they played each other. It's surprising because they're a similar profile of club, really. Joe on Blue Sky said, I support Fulham and Ajax, born in London, grew up near AMS, have spent about a third of my life in the UK and the rest in the Netherlands. Mild preference for Fulham's matchday experience with the walk through Bishop's Park, bloody lovely by the Thames. But honestly, follow them equally. Watching the games, joy at the wins, disappointment at the losses, they're all the same. Now, I get that.
I get that way more.
Because I think if you support a foreign side, you could do it. I always thought, though, you would have more of an inkling with the side that you were more local to. But perhaps if you're not local to one or the other.
It's an identity thing, right? Probably part of it is about where you feel like you're from.
Yeah.
More,
All that kind of
Also,
stuff.
also the time of your life as well. I think a lot of people pick up another club, say they're through their university years, especially
Yes.
for foreign people coming over as well. If they're coming from European countries, they were like, oh, I went to X university, I went here, so I supported Millwall, I supported West Ham, whatever it may be. So I think that occurs as well.
Yeah, it does, and I think that's it. If you meet someone who is from abroad, living in London, obviously there's a lot of people from overseas. Then they'll talk about often a Premier League teams, and I was like, but do you have a Spanish team, or do you have a Polish team, even or whatever?
It's very common in Spain. So a lot of people are from particular places, little towns and what have you. So they support their local teams, so say a Las Palmas or a Cadiz or anything like that. But they will support one of Barcelona or Real Madrid.
That's right.
So
Specifically,
it's
those
very
two.
common. Yeah.
In a way that doesn't really happen, say like in Scotland.
It is. It is strange. And then you'll go to a place like Bilbao, where everyone will just support Athletic Bilbao. So you'll get kind of like a Newcastle. There's a lot of common. There's a lot of comparisons there between the two.
You've got an interesting insight into this, David, because you're from Sunderland. You support Sunderland, and yet, would you call yourself a Manchester United fan as well?
Yeah, no. Honestly, that's the interesting one. It comes from two places. I'm from a little town in County Durham. It's on the border with Sunderland. That comes through my granddad, who gave me my first football experience. He took me to Roker Park when Roker Park was still up and running. And then all my friends at school, they were all Sunderland as well. Not a Newcastle fan in sight at my school. And then my uncle took me to a lot of football as well, and his granddad was a huge Man United fan through watching the Busby Babes and such. So he was from that era. So I got it from that side as well.
Yep.
So it was always a strange one for me to go through in that. But in terms of identity and football experience, and I always think something my granddad used to say. It was like, you've got to support your local team, and that was always drummed into me like early, very very early about that. And he never understood. Like, he's like, I know your uncle, likes Man United and he takes you there sometimes and everything, but like Sunderland are your team.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, they are.
So would you say Sunderland first, Man United second? Then?
I absolutely would.
Okay,
absolutely would.
Yeah.
Because it's where I'm from. So I feel that link and identity to it. As much as I've had great moments watching Man United. I think Ryan Giggs was. I remember I think my first football shirt was a Man United shirt. Because I love watching Ryan Giggs play. And I was like amazed by this skinny kid winger, and I was just like, wow, he's amazing. So I think it went through that. It's where you're from. It's where you're from for me.
Presumably, you've never met anybody who's a Sunderland and Newcastle United fan.
Oh no, absolutely not. They're wrong uns if they do exist somewhere.
Yeah. Well, we got this from Ben on Blue Sky, who said, "I grew up in Milton Keynes. When the Dons moved in, I knew it was tainted fruit, but I swallowed it down eagerly. I was also impressed to see the Dons fans building AFC Wimbledon, so I started following their rise up the pyramid. Today, I am a true 50-50 MK Dons AFC Wimbledon fan. I go to both regularly when they play each other, which is more frequent nowadays. I tend to support whoever needs it most. I always wear both shirts, though, one under the other, so I can pick which pub to visit
This
before.
This is a parody. This isn't a real person.
Now, Ben, if you are taking the piss...
Ben is taking the piss. Come on.
Which we suspect that you are, and your sole purpose of this was getting this message to Andy Brassel. Don't worry, it has been delivered to him. Okay, and Andy was, completely bewildered, dismissive, angered by it, all those kind of emotions.
It was a direct hit.
I'm surprised he didn't say his name was Don Womble.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, I think that would stretch it, but maybe Ben's being genuine there. Although Ben, we're not sure.
If you are being genuine, please send in proof.
Yes.
That's the only way we can settle this.
That is. Yeah, photos where it didn't happen, Jim.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So to kind of close this out, Discord legend Marie has been in touch, and she says, "I'm in the US as well, and I support Leeds United, Celtic, Barca, Minnesota United, KC Current, and Birmingham Legion. Leeds is the only team that can absolutely ruin me, which they do often."
That's a great way to finish there, Marie. My goodness, to have a load of teams like that. But would you, just quickly, David, do you have a foreign side as well that you support? You had spent a lot of time in Spain.
Yeah, I was going to say I had like 6-7 years in Spain, so I always had an affinity to Real Betis.
Betis?
Yeah.
Not as much as Man United?
Oh, no, you can't. There is an emotion there where you can't have that for another team. There is only one team, and there's levels to it.
Level. It's all about levels, isn't it?
It's all about levels.
It is all about levels. Right, gentlemen, moving on from that, we're going to do a football nickname follow-up. Now, we mentioned on Monday's show that listener Peter got in touch to tell us about Chievo Verona's nickname, the Flying Donkeys. Many of you will be aware of that. This was because fans of their rivals, Hellas Verona, would say that donkeys would fly before Chievo played in Serie A. Then Chievo were promoted to Serie A in 2001, and the fans started calling themselves the Flying Donkeys. We've had some great nicknames sent in as well, following on from the mailbag again last week, where we gave a few of our own. Jim, what have we got here?
Ian on Instagram has told us that Egham Town are referred to as the Sarnies, as in egg and ham sandwiches, which is just exceptional work.
Egg, ham,
the Sarnies.
Oh,
yeah,
I like that.
That's not bad anymore, Jim.
Declan on Instagram tells us that La Liga team CD Leganés, their nickname is Los Pepineros, which directly translates to the cucumber growers.
And their mascot is just a big cucumber man.
Great.
Yeah.
That's not bad. I think that's pretty worthy. Tom got in touch on Instagram, who reminded us about the brilliant story behind Hartlepool United being known as the Monkey Hangers. Is it a brilliant story? It's definitely a story.
It's certainly a story. I think it's apocryphal as well.
Oh,
a lot of people listening to the show will know this, but I think it's part of our responsibility, isn't it, as a football podcast, to pass on these urban legends to new generations who might not be aware of them.
Indeed, a lot of people think this is true.
Yes,
this story. It's often presented as fact. I'll let you make up your own minds, but I'm telling you now, it's not true. So this was the Monkey Hangers. The reason we've got that name, again, a lot of you know, but those who don't, during the Napoleonic Wars, a French ship was wrecked in a storm off the Hartlepool coast, and the only survivor from the wreckage was a monkey, allegedly dressed in a French army uniform, which, of course, they would often make sure that they had monkey sizes, of course, and that was there to provide entertainment for the crew on board. A group of locals found the monkey on the beach. They decided to hold a trial because the monkey was unable to answer their questions, and because they'd neither seen a monkey nor a Frenchman, they concluded that it must have been a French spy. So the monkey was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging it on the beach. Yeah, so that's why they're called the Monkey Hangers.
And of course, their mascot was Hangus the monkey for a bit. And
Hangus.
One of them. There's been a few Hangus the monkeys.
Yeah.
One of them ran for mayor as a joke candidate. Won and served 3 terms. So, I mean, that's the real story.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'd like to remind everybody that Pete Donaldson is from Hartlepool.
Yeah, and he's not Angus the monkey, although that might be in his future.
But he's from this town where that all happened, other than the actual...
Suspicious.
Yeah, main bit of the story. Right, more of your questions after this. Jim, you got the next one.
I do. Charles has been in touch on X. He says, there's recently been a lot of talk about the gap between the Premier League and the Championship widening. And with the current promoted clubs making up 3 of the bottom 6 places, that still seems to be the case. With Ipswich beating Spurs recently and getting a point against Manchester United, to what extent do you think the cliche is true?
I think it's very true. I think it's only growing. I think especially so your Championship clubs who have... The ones who are just coming up to the Championship, the ones who have stayed in the Championship, and then the gap to the teams with the parachute payments. And then from then on, the gap to the Premier League is too significant. There's just far too much money involved in the Premier League on all ends to even begin to compete at the start.
Do you think the parachute payments are problematic? Because a lot of clubs say actually it's almost too much. It dopes the Championship too much.
It creates this kind of yo-yo class of teams, doesn't it? Where you get so many teams coming up and going down, and maybe they stay up for a season or so, but there are familiar faces coming up and down, and that churn is part of the problem, isn't it?
And you also wonder, how much they want to be a solid Premier League club sometimes. You're just kind of like, are they happy to yo-yo?
I know what you mean, yeah, because the fans, well, maybe not fans, you hear one or two people saying, look, just get promoted. Because it used to be, fans said, we've gone up too early.
Yeah.
Whereas now people just go up and get the parachute payments. Even if you get, absolutely hammered in the Premier League.
I thought about Sunderland a few years ago when Luton beat Sunderland and Luton ended up going up. And a lot of Sunderland fans who I spoke to were like, it's a little bit... They got nervy. They were like, it's a bit too early. Like, we don't want to go up yet. And then like, you're almost like, that's the Premier League. It's but there is that mentality. And I've spoken to fans of other championship clubs, and they said, we quite like the championship.
Yeah.
And we quite like everything that is about the championship and hate everything about what the Premier League stands for.
Well, I mean, I always, you're saying when Fulham will get relegated to the championship, I was like, there's worse places to be. I mean, there's some huge clubs down there and so on. But Fulham are a little bit different because of the ownership and obviously parachute payments as well. They do have a bit of cash. I know you've got the laws in place to say you just can't spend anymore, but they are way more flush than a lot of teams down there, and obviously that would annoy.
Just from picking up the loose change dropped at games,
says the Arsenal
presumably.
Fan. Unbelievable. But I think that the gap. The only kind of spanner in the works to this argument would be because of the money now in the Championship, due to these parachute payments and all, is you can get some quality managers in there.
That's key. I was going to say some clubs have really struck gold.
Yes,
like Ipswich with McKenna.
Exactly,
great example.
But even Fulham with Marco Silva.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
To a point, Leicester with Maresca.
You're right, and that was the other obvious one that I was going to go for. Is that you can attract these managers and say, look, you've actually not got a bad budget for this league. This league, in terms of revenue, in terms of the amount of supporters and all, it's in the top 10 biggest in the world, or certainly was, I think still is. You can really do something. You can go up, we'll get a bigger budget and all that. Now, obviously, Maresca, Chelsea come along and he goes. Whereas Silva at Fulham was often, when a bigger club came along, he was quick to go and all that, where he stayed there. And he is the reason why Fulham are now an established Premier League side. And if Ipswich do stop, it will be because of the quality manager we've got with McKenna. So, is the gap widening? It's more difficult because, like I said earlier, or on yesterday's pod, you used to be able to play a more traditional British style in the Premier League a few years ago. Again, the stats used to say the more direct you are, the more likely you are going to stay in the league. And so the idea of trying to play out from the back doesn't always work. Look at Company and Burnley, for example, but there are other issues there. But if you could play that traditional way, then you could probably stay up. You didn't have to have a rethink. Whereas now that's not so likely. But of course, you have a new generation of managers. Yes, largely from abroad, of course. But if you can do it, then I think it is possible and I think that's encouraging, that you can still play some decent football and stay up. But it is rare; it's very rare.
I think we've shown the players who have come up to the Premier League as well. So if you look at Palace, the way that they've been buying in recent years, your Whartons, Elise, Eze, those talents, as soon as they shine in the Championship, they get plucked straight away. Those teams are still left behind, and that makes it. That just puts them a few more steps back. That makes everything a bit more difficult for them.
Yeah. So I think, to what extent is the cliche true? It's quite difficult.
Well, I think
to quantify.
A key thing to establish, though, is how you define the gap. Is it first in the Championship with 17th in the Premier League, or is it first in the Championship with first in the Premier League? There's a lot of kind of wiggle room within that. Is it about more than teams just managing to stay up and compete? Now, last season, all 3 promoted clubs were relegated, which suggests obviously the gap is widening. But the only time that's ever happened before in the Premier League was in 97-98, and in 22-23. All 3 promoted clubs survived, that being Forest, Fulham and Bournemouth. So, which also kind of throws a spanner into that work. So I don't know if it is widening sort of dramatically. I think it's wider than I think it has been very wide for a long time.
Yes.
But I don't know how much that width is shifting, if that makes sense.
If you're comparing it to the 1980s, of course, it's way wider.
Yeah.
I mean, no one, even in the 1990s, a side like, well, obviously famously with Forest, but even like Norwich or Sheffield Wednesday, when they got promoted, they then sort of finish in the top half, or even the top 5 or 6 or whatever it was. Those days are well and truly gone. And I think that you're right, Jim, to sort of start saying that, is it wider than it was? No, the chasm was created.
Yeah.
And I think that it's just there.
If it was as wide as, I think people are a bit alarmist about it. And if it was as wide as people think, all 3 promoted clubs would get relegated every year. And we're nowhere near that.
No,
we're nowhere close to that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I think but for me, that's the answer. Is it was as I say, it was widened, and I think that's where we are now. The idea that a side can go up and have a tilt and maybe finish in, the top 4 or get a Champions League spot or something like that is quite ridiculous.
But that said, I mean, all three promoted clubs look in quite serious danger this year. So, we'll see, won't we, as things carry on.
David, you got a question on Instagram?
Indeed, one from me. From Chris on Instagram. Who, in your opinion, is the best football commentator of all time?
Barry Davis, obviously.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's a generational thing, isn't it?
Well, it is and it isn't. So obviously, you're going to be informed by that voice when you were growing up watching football. But I think his voice, actually, there's something, there's a gravitas to it that maybe some commentators don't have now. And that's not a dig at current commentators to say that they're crap. It's that this guy was so good.
Yeah.
Because if you are a commentator, it's an incredibly difficult job. So kudos to all the commentators out there. But I think with Barry Davis, there was something about him, that he would be able to comment on big moments by not having a pre-written line or not doing anything. The Dennis Bergkamp goal against Argentina.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up.
We often talk about the Dutch commentary. Dennis Bergkamp was actually Barry Davis. Just it was beautifully knocked down by Bergkamp. Oh, what a goal!
Yeah,
that's all he said. He just shouted, "Oh, what a goal!"
Yeah,
which makes it feels more authentic.
Yeah, that
wasn't overthought.
Exactly.
Exactly.
And again, if you've got a good line to say, fine. I'm not having a dig at those who do that. But Davis, there was something about it where he knew when to speak and knew when to just sit back and let the action do the talking. He didn't have to talk all the time and fill it all with words.
They're the best. They're the best who can do that. For me, it's either and I'll give you another name as well. I'd really like Brian Miller.
Ah, well, yeah. I mean, So I feel like he was slightly before my time, even though there was obviously overlap with him commentating me. But again, that voice, there's something about.
I was going to say, and look, we're, I guess as well of the age that you are, your core memories in terms of football are formed by those clips, those bits of commentary. I think.
Yeah, I learned a new word researching this question, which is phonesthetic, which is essentially aesthetics for sounds, and that's a big part of it, isn't it? Just the tone of a person's voice and how it sounds. Like for that reason, even though both these commentators have their detractors, I like Ian Darke. I just literally like the sound of his voice. And I think actually Guy Mowbray's pretty good because the position he's in is hard.
Yes.
John Motson would have been an obvious answer to this question for a long time, but he did have a kind of steep decline, didn't he, towards the end of his broadcasting career.
About a legendary commentator.
Yeah, absolutely. But another one I like at the moment is Conor McNamara, because I think he brings a sense of urgency to proceedings that doesn't feel forced. It feels like if Brentford score a goal, he gets it exactly right of how important that is and what a big deal that is in the context of the day's game.
I mean, we're focusing on TV as well here.
Yeah.
I love John Murray on the radio on 5 Live. I think he's really, really good. And actually, radio commentary, obviously a different discipline for obvious reasons. You can't bloody see it. So there's something lovely about listening to games on the radio, I think, as well. And I would actually say that standards on the radio have kind of kept more. I would maybe suggest there's been more a consistency with maybe the style, which I think served them well. Which TV, as I say, like compare Barry Davis to, say, Darren Fletcher, very different style of commentary.
Yeah, and it's fun aesthetics are important. It's just a word I know.
Exactly. Well, now we all know.
I was doing a drive one day, and I had the Sunderland game on the radio, and I used to always listen to that as well. And Michael Gray is and I love his voice, and Gary Bennett as well. Like, they're both really good. And again, it just kind of brings back childhood memories.
Yeah, but to circle all the way back around to Barry Davis, what I liked about Barry is that he would give a bit of an opinion as well.
Yeah.
And actually, it was a good opinion, because sometimes with commentators, you hear them, they go to say it and they go to... And I understand it from their point of view, because some people say, hang on a minute, well, this guy's getting above his station. And now, of course, you have the co-commentator. And we see on TNT Sport, previously BT Sport, sometimes there's a third person there as well. Whereas I again, go all the way back to the 1990 World Cup, Barry Davis was fuming with England against Cameroon.
Yeah.
And he was praising them so much. They are passing the ball better. They're doing all this. And it felt like you had... in a commentator, there was a little bit of punditry there. Now, as I say, I think that might be seen as unwelcome nowadays. But with the commentator, if you get it right, which he did in those kind of moments, then I think there was something to that. And also noises they make. I mean, Martin Tyler, when he just went, that or something. There's something about that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, this generation of great football moments is sadly mostly going to have Jamie Carragher and Gary Neville, as good as they can be, going, oh, over the top of it, which can be a bit much. But I go back to Barry Davis going, oh, Pat Bonner.
Yeah, exactly.
He can just sum up the emotion of a situation so well.
As the ball,
with tone.
Yeah, totally. As it's a routine save for Ireland goalkeeper Pat Bonner against Netherlands in the '94 World Cup. Routine save. It trickles in. It's a shocking mistake. And you're right, that noise gets to the absolute gut of what happened. It is such a sinking, sickener of a moment for anybody who was supporting Ireland that day. Whereas, yeah, you can fill it with words, but sometimes a noise paints 1,000 words. I'll move on. Let's finish with this from Ryan on Instagram. What, in your opinion, is the best decade of football? Well, we're in a bit of a slight nostalgia bubble here, so let's finish the show with a bit more. David, best decade of football. It's difficult to, decades sort of bleed into the other, and to kind of take a decade is almost sort of pointless at some point, but we still do it, and we're going to do it now. What do you reckon?
It's hard because I have an affinity for, the 90s and a lot of the players through the 90s, just the style of football and that. It was kind of my first steps into football as well. So that always means a lot to me. But it's I guess it's got to be 2000, 2010 really.
Oh, really? Interesting.
What, 2000 to 2010?
Yeah.
Why is that?
I just think we saw a big shift in the quality of the game from then on.
Came faster.
Yeah. And I think we saw it develop on a higher level.
Referees tightening up.
The rivalries.
Fouls and
well.
stuff.
Yeah.
Also, you look back on the 90s and goals would be ruled out because someone somewhere was offside, even if they weren't even remotely interfering with the play. There were all these little changes that they happen gradually, but they have made the game a lot better.
Because the pass-back rule was introduced in the 90s. So, it's in the 90s, you still had that.
Sure, right. That was right at the beginning, wasn't it? But still,
Still in the 90s, baby.
Incredibly boring. I think maybe Jose Mourinho alone is a good argument for the 2010s.
When you've got a little bit of Pep Guardiola as well.
I'm tempted by the 90s as well, but I think kind of have to take a step back. And I think that's a good argument for the 2010s, because you've got the two best players of the generation, who are arguably the two best players ever. There's a good argument for that, I think, leading two absolute giants to crazy, crazy levels of success. You've got the kind of, it starts with that Guardiola, that second Champions League win over Man United, the 3-1, which was such a complete display. 5 teams won the Premier League, including teams you wouldn't expect, like Leicester and Man United. But being serious about that, though, it was the end of Ferguson's reign, which for him to still be doing what he was doing like that relatively recently is amazing. It was a bit more competitive. Obviously, we're nearly halfway into this decade. I don't think you get many people making an argument that it's shaping up to be the best ever, because it's very predictable, isn't it? The standard of the football is incredibly high, but it is a bit more predictable, which does affect it.
I feel like it might even be my worst, what I've witnessed.
Really?
Yeah. Through in terms of entertainment and enjoyment. Whether I've got older or the game, I'm not too sure it is, or the game's got well. I just don't enjoy it as much as I used to back then.
I'm more seduced with the noughties rather than the 2010s.
Yeah.
Because I think by the time the 2010s come along, it is unequivocal that you have your few elite clubs. It was established that there are the haves and have-nots in football. It was locked in.
I suppose there is a sense that some football has become machine-like now, and that did start in that decade.
Also, look at the amount of trebles that have been won over the years.
Yeah.
From, you take what would be in European football, the first one I believe I'm right in saying was Celtic in the 1960s. There's one that decade. There's one in the 70s. There's one in the 80s. There's one in the 90s. In the 2000s, I think there was just one, was there? Or maybe did Guardiola and Barcelona make it? They were in quick succession. You had Barcelona and then Inter. What was it? Be the season after or something.
Right,
Bayern did one.
Yeah, but in the 2010s, suddenly it's like, Bayern have won a treble. Barcelona have won another one.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's Man City. Obviously, that would be the 2020s. But suddenly it's just like it's not that big a thing anymore. Yeah. And I think that football has gone very top heavy in that kind of way, which is why the noughties. I think in terms of think about where football was at the start of the of the decade in 2000. France win the Euros. Then you do, well, okay, Spain is just in a different decade, but okay, that tiki-taka, I know he doesn't like it, but comes in and Guardiola, the tactical evolution. Michael Owen wins the Ballon d'Or in 2001. By the end of that decade, he's seen as a relic. And the game's moved on way too much.
It's interesting to look at the Ballon d'Or as well.
Yeah.
If you look at everything pre-Messi, Ronaldo dominance of football, I think a lot of people do enjoy that era. That it was great that Nedved won it in 2000.
Yes,
it was great that Kaká then won it.
Kaká was phenomenal.
Yeah, exactly. It switched it up in that, and look, Nedved's one of my favourite players. And through that era,
and you think as well that maybe AC Milan were one of the big sides at the time. What did they win? One Serie A or maybe two in that decade?
It's incredible.
It wasn't that teams didn't dominate, and also I think the Premier League became what it is in terms of its really proper playing style in that decade, and it kind of looks and feels as it is. My inkling, though, is to say the 90s purely because when I grew up, your most informative years, when you really got excited about football, that was it. So that would be that. But I would say the argument to talk about the quality of 90s football, I've said it before and I'll say it again, World Cup 98, treat yourself to looking at the squads in that World Cup. I would argue no other World Cup has had the quality and the names that World Cup had in recent years.
Also, the 1980s were a dark period for football.
Yeah, they were.
And the 90s turned that around massively.
Definitely.
The game as it is now did begin in the 90s, really. That's not just Premier League propaganda.
No, it's not Premier League propaganda because Serie A was huge, of course. We had it on Channel 4 here. Serie A was huge. Even La Liga, I mean, that was... You still had, obviously, the big size. I mean, but in that decade, Barcelona started to become Barcelona with Cruyff's Barcelona, obviously the dream team. Now, you would argue that the Barcelona that we know now was actually in the noughties with Rijkaard and then into Guardiola.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But, I mean,
The World Cups were excellent as well.
I was going to say, I mean, I think you all almost answered. I mean, when is your favourite international tournament? Like, what year is that?
Yeah, I mean, for England's showing, I probably wouldn't say 98. And actually, it was a bit of a disappointing
But 98
final.
as a spectacle, as a whole.
But 98 as a spectacle, the way it looked, the way it felt and everything, that definitely would be one of the most kind of informative tournaments that I would remember. But, I mean, do you know what, though? I actually have to fast forward to say 2018 was a great World Cup.
It was,
and even, I mean, the annoying thing is...
Standards have been really high of recent World Cups.
In Russia and Qatar, two obviously very questionable places. I don't want to get into all that. Two phenomenal World Cups, two of the best ones we've ever seen.
And another thing that we have happening now, which, maybe I'm being short-sighted on this, but because of the nature of football and how much the finances have gone up, there's a danger this will happen with Kylian Mbappe, and I think you can argue it's happened with Neymar, that there are players who they're so wealthy that... there's only a couple of clubs who can afford them. And this Mbappe situation, it's not going well yet. I'm sure he'll turn it around, but it could be a disaster for Real Madrid and for him. And you just feel like those huge name players perhaps...
Oh, it's definitely true. There's only certain landing spots. Where can you go? There's like 2 or 3. You don't get a Gabriel Batistuta at Fiorentina anymore. You don't get these superstars who play for these clubs because of that. And would be my argument against it being the sort of the 2010s, because that, as I said, when you had the elite clubs, they're stockpiling talent, all that kind of stuff. You simply do not have, as I say, an absolute gem playing for... maybe even a mid-table side or something.
Honestly, I remember before...
not that they were mid-table. I mean, Fiorentina were in the Champions League and all, but they were never going to win really Serie A. They came slightly close.
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean about that mistake. I remember when I first saw Andrea Arshavin for Zenit St. Petersburg.
Oh, yeah.
In their UEFA Cup run.
That's right, and they won it in Manchester.
Yeah, exactly. And they played Rangers, and he absolutely destroyed them. And I think a few of the other games were on British TV before that as well, the Zenit games. So you got to watch it, and I was like... I've only seen this guy play 3 or 4 times. I'm fascinated by him. Why does no one ever talk about him? Why is he this good? And he's not in a major league. And things like that. And like you say, that becomes less common now.
Totally, yeah.
And just taking it quickly back to Neymar and Mbappe, I feel like they're sort of big superstar brands, and the pressure on them is immense. Now, obviously, top name players have had pressure on them for a long, long time, but it feels like it's going in a way that's like unhealthy.
Toxic. It is. It's toxic, and the pressure is from the Messi Ronaldo era.
Yeah.
Those two were that good. Those two dominated the Ballon d'Or that much. Now, Haaland and Mbappe, you go and do the same.
Exactly.
We want to be impressed and entertain us.
I don't want that for them or us.
No, neither do I. No, absolutely not.
Yeah, absolutely not. Well, I think we've probably, Ryan, settled on the noughties there. Would you concede, Jim?
Sure.
Arsenal Invincibles, come on.
You're right.
Yeah. Well, do get in touch with us. Perhaps we'll do a follow-up on that one. Get in touch to tell us which you think is the best decade of football. And we'll see what your thoughts are. Because maybe there's some older listeners who'll say, no, the 1930s, which seems unlikely to go back that far. But anyway, thank you very much for listening to the Football Ramble Mailbag, part of the Acast Creator Network. Do get your questions in for next week's episode. Follow us on X, Blue Sky, TikTok and Instagram at Football Ramble, and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your pods. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for your questions. See you on Monday.